This morning, the workshop is going to be about a poem that I came across about 6 or 7 years ago. Now, I'm not going to put the full text of the poem on screen because I didn't want you to be distracted by the text. When I read it, I want you to be really present and that you're really listening to the words. So that's why I'm not putting it up. I just want to give you a little background. As I said, I came across it about 6 or 7 years ago. It was at a difficult time in my life. I had just been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I was in a lot of pain and suffering a plethora of symptoms like pains, aches, chronic fatigue, brain fog, digestive issues, loads. Anyway, I ended up going on a day trip to Cork because my husband had some work down there and I decided to go for some retail therapy. And he dropped me off in the city centre. But within an hour or two, I found myself sitting on a little park bench in the middle of Cork City. I was crying because I was in so much pain and I was so tired that I just couldn't continue walking. So that was a bit of a crisis point for me and a low moment. And I sat in that park bench for quite a long time. And then eventually I saw a bookstore and I thought, well, I'll go and get a book because at least I can read. And I went down to the shop and I walked straight over to a shelf and I picked up this book with the invitation poem. And there was something about that poem that just spoke directly to me. In the park, I'd actually been crying and I said to God, you know what, God, if this is what my future looks like, I really don't want to go on. And I actually did feel that at that moment. So when I picked up the phone, I nearly had this sense that God was speaking to me and he was answering me and saying, look, I'm inviting you somewhere. So anyway, that's just to give you a little bit of background. So now I want you just to close your eyes again, and it's a long poem and I'm going to read it to you. But while I'm reading it, I want you to be a bit like Samuel when he said, speak, Lord, your servant is listening. I want you to really listen. And when I say that, I want you to listen with your ears, but I want you to listen with your mind and your body. I want you to be aware of any sensation that might be arising in your body as you hear the words. Are there any images or memories coming to mind? Or are there any words that seem to be speaking louder than others? So with bearing that in mind, then we'll just start to read. The invitation. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for, and if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. It doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dream, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it or fade it or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you're telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty, every day, and if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the moon, yes. It doesn't interest me to know where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. Now, we're in the middle of a pandemic at the minute. We're in the middle of a global crisis. We're in the middle of a global crisis. And Captain Boyle's words in Juno and the Peacock come to mind. The whole world's in a state of chassis. And that's exactly what it feels for us at the moment. But besides being in a global pandemic, we're actually in a personal crisis. And Pope Francis in Let Us Dream talks about entering into crisis to be sifted. So I wanted to break down the word crisis just to get a little idea and open it up around what it is. So it's defined as a difficult or a dangerous time when a solution is needed quickly. Another definition is crisis from the Latinized word of the Greek word crisis, turning point in a disease. And it's that definition that holds a lot of weight for me, because I know that that was a turning point in my disease when I picked up that book. And a crisis is at such a moment a person with disease, they could get better or worse. Thankfully, I got better. And even if we look at that word disease and break it up, dis and ease. Dis-ease is like when we're feeling uncomfortable or restlessness. And I believe that all disease is rooted in spiritual woundedness. Dr. Wayne Dyer talks about, he says that for every problem, there's a spiritual solution. And I think that's very true. So what I wanted this morning was that instead of looking at the pandemic through the eyes of frustration, anger, being scared, not knowing when this is going to come to an end, I wanted us to look at through it a different lens, the lens of seeing it as an invitation, a wonderful opportunity to go inside, to enter our own personal crisis in order to be sifted, as Pope Francis says. So it's an invitation this morning to move inside, to filter, to ferment and distill. And maybe in doing that, we'll begin to come to find that treasure within, that pearl of great price. So the first, I've taken a couple of verses out of the poem and I'm hoping to unpack them a little with you this morning. So the first one is Heart's Longing. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing. Now, do you know what your heart aches for? Or are you even aware of an ache or deep unfulfilled heart desires? Have you ever really stopped to tune in and listen to your heart and find out what it might be saying? Have you ever stopped when that restless little voice or feeling comes up that is trying to get your attention, but you just turn aside from it and don't bother? Have you lost sight of your deepest dreams? Have you got caught up in worldly pursuits around, having a suitably impressive lifestyle, and then you've become deadened to your deepest desires? Have you become petrified? Petrified in the sense that you're afraid to move forward, or petrified in the sense that you've become fossilized and hardened over time, and that you've lost your wild enthusiasm for life and your dreams? Have you become so alienated from that deeper voice within that belongs to the parts of yourself that you've left behind? The voice that you've traded for a sense of security and control. Do you know what you really want? Do you remember Bartimaeus, the story of the blind man, the beggar? And he's brought to Jesus, and Jesus says to him, "What do you want me to do?" For you. And immediately Bartimaeus answers, "Rabbi, let me see again." Now there's a double sense to that saying for Bartimaeus. And what I believe is Bartimaeus had already done the inner work. Bartimaeus as a beggar sitting there day after day, his only real concern was where the next mouthful would come from. He was physically blind to the outside world, but that meant Bartimaeus wasn't seduced by the outside world either. And so he looked inside, and he got in touch with his deepest desires, so that the moment Jesus arrived, Bartimaeus had an answer. "Lord, I want to see again." But Bartimaeus wanted to see again on a different level, because he was going to come back into that world, the outer reality, with a sense of purpose and meaning and following his deepest desire. So I'm asking you this morning, do you know your deepest desires? Would you be willing maybe to take the time to go deeper, go into that inner reality and start doing the work within? Sorrow. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you've touched the center of your own sorrow, if you've been opened by life's betrayals or have become shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. Now, when I think of sorrow, my deepest sorrow was when my mother died, and I was in my final year in college. I'd actually taken a year out because she was undergoing chemotherapy. So my brothers and sisters, she got very sick after every session. So we were taking turns of, minding her and making sure that she was okay. So I came back to finish my final year, and I came back in September, and my mother unfortunately died that November. So I remember going to a homeopath for a remedy for grief, because I knew that I needed to get the year finished, and I really couldn't grieve because I'd taken a year out and the priority was to get through the year. So thankfully the remedy worked. And I think somewhere inside I knew that I was going to need time and space for this. So about 18 months after I'd finished college, that restless, uneasy feeling began to emerge, and I knew that there was something afoot. So I went back to the homeopath and told her how I was feeling, and she gave me a remedy, and it was around allowing the grief to surface. Now, I remember sitting in the kitchen with my son and his girlfriend, and I was helping them. He was doing his leaving, and I was helping them with some French. And I felt a physical shift in my body, and I knew that something very deep was on the move. Now, the realization is that I could have kept going to the homeopath and asking for a remedy that would stop the grief coming through. But I knew that there was only one way through this, around this, and it was through it. So I had to deal with that. But I want to know if I had to feel the depth of that sorrow and that loss. But there's something very wonderful happened when I started to experience that. Because what I realized was there was compassion. Compassion began to emerge. Compassion for myself and compassion for others. And the truth is that passion's born out of pain and suffering. And it's only when we consent to sit with it, with our own pain and sorrow, can we begin to have compassion for others. And compassion literally comes, it means to suffer with. And it's that capacity to be able to literally walk in someone's shoes or to actually be in their skin. And there's something else that comes through with compassion, fraternity, that sense that we are brothers and sisters, we're all children of God, and we're in this together. And it's a knowing that there can never really be any peace or joy for me until there's joy and peace for you. And I think Dr. Michael Ryan said that so succinctly when he said about COVID, no one is safe until we're all safe. So in that birth of compassion, I actually realized and found a deeper closeness with people, my family, friends, actually with everyone. So I just want to know if you've experienced that pain. Have you allowed yourself to experience it? Have you experienced the rawness of loss, rejection, betrayal, the physical pain of absence? Or have you built a thorny heart wall around you so that you're not going to have to suffer or experience that pain? Have you cut yourself off from others' pain and suffering for fear that you might have to experience your own? Joy. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own. If you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes without cautioning us to be careful, to be realistic, to remember the limitations of being human. Do you know what joy feels like? Real joy. Or has it been so long since you felt joy, you don't remember what that feels like? Or is it a case that you've never really experienced it, so you don't know what it is? Now, when I'm talking about joy, I'm not talking about happiness. Joy and happiness are two different things. Happiness is an outward expression and it's fleeting, but joy is an inner feeling. It's visceral. It comes from a deep sense of connectedness to yourself and something bigger. Joy endures, and it can endure hardship, trials, and it connects with our meaning and purpose. Now, this picture it's taken from Dancing at Lunasa. And I'm sure you all remember that moment when Reese, the young father, had been tinkering with the radio and trying to get the right frequency. And all of a sudden it happens. And he taps into the frequency and the music comes through the radio. And the sisters are in the kitchen. And on some level, they have tapped into a frequency deep within themselves, that frequency that joy reverberates on. And before we know it, they're up, they're dancing, they're out in the garden with absolute abandon. Now that's the joy I'm talking about. Have you lost a sense of that? Did you ever have it? Is it something that one of your deepest desires that you would really like to have? Truth. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling me is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. Now, this is very difficult because in Jack Nicholson's words, we can't handle the truth. And we don't want to, we like to think that we're honest and truthful people, but the bottom line is that we tell little white lies every day. And we're afraid to tell the truth to people because we've learned over time that honesty might not be the best policy. We're afraid if we tell the truth to people, friends, families, that people might be hurt, they might dislike us. Worst of all, they might reject us. So we tell them little white lies. We keep the status quo. We don't want to hurt or upset people. And our need to belong and to be needed and loved is so strong that at times we'll go to any lengths to hold on to that. Now, I have a little story about that sense of being true to yourself and being honest. I was working in a job a few years ago, and it was a really good job. The hours were great. The perks were great. I had 6-week holidays in the summer. There were staff outings, and the staff were really lovely. It was a lovely place to work, and even aesthetically, the building was beautiful as well. But there was one day, and there was 3 of us standing around, and my boss came over, and it was raining outside, and she singled me out, and she said, "Christine, will you go and get me a sandwich, because it's raining outside, and I don't want to get wet." Now, I know the other 2 were a bit surprised as well, and so was I. And I said, no, I would go and get the sandwich. But as I was walking to that deli, something deep in me was stirring. And I knew I had to leave the job, because I knew that a threshold had been crossed around my dignity and my self-worth. And I don't know if my boss realized it, but what she was really saying was, you getting wet doesn't matter. I'm more important. And something deep in me was responding to that. Because if I had continued on, I felt there was going to be more instances where my dignity and my sense of self-worth was going to be challenged. So I looked and I got another job, obviously less money, more hours, no perks, your normal holidays. But there was a piece in me about taking that new job, because I knew I'd been true to myself, that I didn't sell myself short. Now, there was disappointment, and I think a sense of betrayal, because when I went and handed in my notice, my boss said to me, "Oh my God, no one's ever left. No one ever leaves." And because it was such a good job and it was such a lovely place to work, it was understandable why people didn't leave. But I knew I was doing the right thing, and I had to do that for myself. So I'm wondering, have you ever had to do that? Disappoint another, to be true to yourself, to be true to that depth in your soul, who is your real being. Alone. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself, and if you truly like the company you keep in the empty moments. So I suppose what this is about is, have you really honestly and truly journeyed home to yourself? Or is that something that really scares you? We've been forced to sit with ourselves during this COVID crisis. We've been forced maybe to acknowledge things about ourselves that we don't really like. We've maybe realized that we're inclined to project outward. So we see our faults and failings in others, but it's easier to see the plank in their eyes than look at the plank in our own. I'm talking here about integrity, and it's about real integrity, spiritual integrity. And that's the state of being undivided, together with the quality of brutal self-honesty. And spiritual integrity, it demands courage, a considerable depth of self-awareness, and an uncompromising willingness to be authentic. Bartimaeus had spiritual integrity, I believe. And I believe God wants us and is calling us and inviting us all to be beings of spiritual integrity. Are you ready to accept that invitation? Are you ready to enter into crisis and to be sifted? And it's not going to be easy, because you're going to have to look at yourself, warts and all, and you're going to have to be willing to accept your faults and your failings. You're going to have to say yes to that stranger who is yourself, that part of you that you push to the shadows, that you don't want to look at. You're going to have to welcome that stranger home. You're going to have to welcome them in, and you're going to have to probably work to change that person, to change that side of yourself. The poet David Whyte writes about an internal marriage. And he says, in the midst of life, where we work hard to put bread on the table and foster a relationship, we often neglect the necessary internal skills which help us pursue, come to know, and then sustain a marriage with the person we find on the inside. So I believe that's what this poem is about. It's an invitation to leave the outer reality and move to your inner reality. It's about searching for the treasure within. It's about finding that deeper spiritual integrity. It's becoming whole so that you can come into the fullness of life and being. And when you plumb the depths of that inner reality and come in touch with that frequency of joy, of desire, you will come to realize that those desires are actually God's desires for you. So now, when you go into the breakup rooms, I'm sending you out with 3 questions. What resonates with you? Where are you now? And what might God be inviting you to be?